There is an article on page number 10. India failed to create positive impression among the business moving away from China. Yesterday, a parliamentary panel on commerce has submitted a report to Raj Sabha saying that China plus one strategy has not been able to properly take off in India. The report says that although China plus one strategy presented in itself a rare opportunity to boost industrialization and for India to emerge as part of global value chain replacing China in various strategic industries. But howsoever, China plus one strategy has not been able to properly take off in India. Whereas the opportunity has been grabbed more seriously by smaller Asian countries like Vietnam, Thailand, Cambodia. They have become the biggest beneficiary of China plus one strategy. And this has happened despite availability of resources, planning, and various government initiatives taken in the recent time. Southeast Asian countries like Vietnam, Thailand, Taiwan, and the Southeast Asian tigers like Singapore, Malaysia, they have emerged as a viable alternative in areas traditionally which are strength of India, like machinery, automobiles, and in areas like transport, electrical equipment industries. Viable alternative for industries and manufacturing bases shifting away from China. Apart from the geographical positioning advantage that these countries have because they are nearer to China, and for any manufacturing base to shift, it's easier to shift to nearby geographical location. But apart from this geographical advantage, some of these countries like Vietnam, Cambodia, Thailand, they have cheaper labor. They also invariably have lower corporate income tax. India has been very cautious in getting into FTAs, but these countries they have taken up the opportunity to sign many free trade agreements. In terms of quality of infrastructure, these countries also have improved and they also have conducive business environment. We will begin understanding what this China plus one strategy is and what are the factors driving this policy. And then we will try to weigh how India has performed in taking advantage of this strategy. China plus one strategy basically is a business strategy adopted by many Western European countries to reduce their reliance on China in terms of supplier of crucial materials like microprocessors, APIs, and hence to reduce the dominant position of China in the global supply chain. So the strategy is to set up additional manufacturing facilities in other countries like India, Bangladesh, Vietnam, Thailand, Cambodia, Indonesia, and in many instances also in Singapore and Malaysia, so as to diversify the supply chain and to mitigate the risk with being solely reliant on China. The phrase China plus one strategy has been in use since 2013, and there are many drivers for this strategy. But this strategy has gained thirst in the aftermath of trade war between China and US. The geopolitical risk caused by the tension between China and United States, this has led to significant shift in manufacturing to other countries. And as China's economy continues to grow, the cost of labor also has increased significantly. It has already surpassed around $3 per hour. In India, it's around $0.6 per hour as the minimum wage. And this has caused many companies seeking alternative location with lower labor cost. For example, Foxconn, it's a major electronic manufacturer. It has moved some of its production from China to India, Indonesia, and Vietnam. The COVID 19 pandemic already highlighted the perils of relying too heavily on a single country as your supplier. During the time of COVID 19, the brutal shutdown that China imposed on itself, it kind of cut itself off from the global supply chain. And this caused problem in delivery of products in the Western and European market. Precisely because of this, in 2020, Samsung announced that it would shift some of its production from China to Vietnam and India. So, supply chain diversification has become a crucial need for the business. Also, several countries, including Vietnam, Indonesia, India, Cambodia, they all have made significant investment in infrastructure and improved their business environment. This has attracted investment in recent time. For example, Vietnam, this nation has invested in deep sea ports. They had many initiatives for industrial parks and they have improved their logistic infrastructure. All these have resulted in making these market better investment option. and they are acting as a pull factor to attract business away from China. Also, with rising income and a growing middle class, many of the Southeast Asian countries and also countries like India and Bangladesh, they offer significant opportunities for companies to tap into new customer market. And that's the reason why companies like Samsung, LG, Xiaomi, they all are expanding their operation in India and other markets to take advantage of large and still growing consumer market. Also because of recent technological upgradation, coming of new technology in manufacturing sector like 3D printing, involvement of concept of blockchain, nanotechnology, introduction of criticality in manufacturing, ceramics, cryogenic technology, all of that requires skilled workers. That is on one hand. And on the other hand, when China is moving up the value chain and becoming a leader in advanced manufacturing, some of the companies are going back to Bangladesh and Vietnam in areas like textile. So there are many pull and push factors which are causing countries to move away from China, and hence they are finding alternative market. And in this scenario, India offers some pull factor for business to come to India. India is a very large consumer base. India has a population of 1.3 billion. India has the second largest customer market, and in this current financial year, India is projected to grow at robust 6.6%, according to the World Bank estimate, despite the fact that many of the countries in the world they are staring at recession and negative growth. India has a large pool of low cost and skilled labor. The minimum wage gap between India and China that has rose enormously in last few years. So countries looking to take advantage of low cost and yet skilled labor, they see a huge pull factor in India. Indian government has invested heavily in infrastructural development, in transport, in power, in telecommunication. India's logistic performance ranking also has improved, and also the overall supply chain capability. Projects like Bharatmala, Sagarmala, Eastern Dedicated Freight Corridor, Western Dedicated Freight Corridor, North-South Dedicated Freight Corridor. We have Chennai-Bangalore Industrial Corridor. We have East Coast Economic Corridor, Mumbai-Bangalore Economic Corridor, Vishakhapatnam Special Economic Zone. Government has pushed and is still planning many infrastructural projects. There also have been favorable government policies. Make in India campaign, especially production linked incentive scheme. This has helped many of the industries to set up their manufacturing base in India. More than 3,500 provisions in the corporate law, they have been decriminalized. Further, through the Jan Vishwas Bill, 42 central acts have been amended to enhance trust-based governance. The technological ecosystem in India has grown enormously. We are leading in vaccine development. We are leading in space-based technological development. We are leading in many areas of biotechnology, in automobiles, and in many of the areas of electronics too. We have large pool of skilled professionals. India also offers a stable political environment. We have a stable democratic setup, and the business can expect a predictable and transparent business environment. We also have trained central industrial security forces to secure the infrastructural projects. CISF plays a key role in national security, and it has been deployed across all major infrastructural projects like airports, atomic energy stations, seaports, space installations, thermal power plants, defense production units, coal fields. So from the point of view of security, the business sentiment is safeguarded. India also has world's largest diaspora, which makes Indians to adopt very quickly to foreign cultures and also languages. India also has the largest English-speaking workforce. Apart from these, if you come to think of it, India also provides strategic location for a gateway towards Middle East and West Asia. India's graph on innovation index has only risen in the last few years. And the fruits of this also can be seen in the recent shift of some of the companies from China to India. In the field of electronics and IT hardware, which is the strength of India, many of the companies like Foxconn, Samsung, LG, Wistron, even some of the Indian companies that were having manufacturing base in China, they have come back to India, like Lava International, Dioxin Technologies, Flex. They have shifted their manufacturing base from China to India. There was already availability of cheap labor. There has been improvement in overall quality of infrastructure. India has improved its rank on ease of doing business, and also because of the government incentives like PLI scheme. The pharmaceutical companies like Pfizer, Merck and Novartis, they are increasing their investment in India. Many of the prominent brands in the textile industry like Gap, Levi's, Ralph Lauren, They are shifting their manufacturing bases from China to India, and this has largely been because of US-China trade war. Even the automotive companies like Toyota, MG Motors, the Great Wall Motors, they also have announced plan to set up manufacturing plants in India. So situation as such is not all that bad, but the remark given by the panel has to be taken seriously. If you see the report has discussed various issues in commerce, and China plus one strategy has been discussed only in one page. So China plus one strategy has not been able to properly take off in the country. This is an observation. Report does not offer further detail into the topic. There are no facts and figures to analyze it objectively. But it is a fact that Vietnam, Thailand, Taiwan, Malaysia, Indonesia even, they also have been the beneficiary. India having such a large, huge market, India should have been the predominant beneficiary of China plus one strategy. Although India has its share, but that is not predominant. UPSC in the prelims 2022 paper has asked a question on Vietnam. This was kind of rather odd to see this kind of question because India wasn't involved in it, and as though it seemed that UPSC was interested in knowing about the economy and polity of Vietnam. This generally does not happen. Rather, in the recent time, it never has happened. But the question was there for a purpose, and you may see such kind of question in coming mains to compare the economy, the political environment, and the business strategy of India and other Southeast Asian countries like Vietnam. Let's go through this question first. Vietnam has been one of the fastest growing economies in the world in the recent years. This is a general correct statement. Vietnam is led by multi-party political system. Vietnam, like China, is also a single-party communist country. Vietnam's economic growth is led to its integration with global supply chain and focus on export. This is a correct statement. Vietnam also has FTA with countries like US and UK, apart from the countries with which India has like Japan and South Korea. So it is very much part of global supply chain. It's correct. For a long time, Vietnam's low labor cost and stable exchange rates have attracted global manufacturers. This is also absolutely correct. But the strength of Vietnam is in manufacturing, not in e-service sector. They are not the most productive. There are other countries like South Korea, Singapore, Japan. They are more productive in e-service sectors in the Indo-Pacific region. So the answer here is option C. So you learn here that their manufacturing is very strong. The share of manufacturing in GDP is close to 25%. The data for which India is still aspirational. Since UPSC has asked specifically about Vietnam, here we'll do exercise of comparing India and Vietnam vis-a-vis China plus one strategy as to why Vietnam seems to be gaining despite the fact that Vietnam is such a small market. India has 1.4 billion people, Vietnam around 97 million. There is no comparison. India is the third largest economy in the world in terms of PPP. Vietnam is the 15th largest economy in terms of PPP. The labor cost in India is around $0.6 per hour, which is slightly higher than that of Vietnam. So in terms of labor cost, Vietnam has an advantage. In terms of overall human capital also, Vietnam seems to have advantage because in the SDI ranking, in the last rank, India stood at 132, but Vietnam stood at 115. Not very impressive, but relatively better than India. In the last ease of doing business ranking, India stood at 63. Vietnam stood at 70. But you understand the ease of doing business ranking was done for only two cities in India, Delhi and Mumbai. So that doesn't give the overall picture. In terms of ease of market entry, it is understood that Vietnam has less complex regulations and bureaucracy. And this is something that is identified and appreciated by business. In terms of infrastructure development, India has taken enormous effort in last few years. If we look at World Economic Forum's Global Competitiveness Index of 2021, India stood at 61 and Vietnam stood at 66. But in Global Competitive Index, there are many indicators, many factors, including health and others. If we look at only from the perspective of infrastructure, then Vietnam stood in terms of quality of overall infrastructure at 48 and India stood at 66. So if we only look at infrastructure, Vietnam does better than India. Vietnam performs better than India in infrastructure in terms of quality of seaport and railways. But India performs better than Vietnam in terms of airways, electricity access, and roadways. So in some sectors of infrastructure, Vietnam performs better. Also in overall quality of infrastructure, Vietnam performs better. Both countries have political stability. Although India has a stable democracy and Vietnam has a stable one party communist state, but there is no turmoil as such, like in Myanmar or other countries. Vietnam is a stable communist state. But the real edge that Vietnam gets is in this area. The corporate tax in India is 25% for domestic companies and 40% for foreign companies. Although India has come up with a tax incentive scheme in which the corporate income tax would be 15% for new manufacturing companies that will establish before October 1, 2019 and begin their production before March 31, 2023. But this is an exception to the rule. Largely, the corporate income tax 25% for domestic companies and 40% for foreign companies. But in Vietnam, it is 20%, both for domestic and foreign companies. The GST here 18%, the VAT there is only 10%. Also, in terms of free trade agreements, India is very cautious. India deliberates very well before getting into free trade agreements. Vietnam has free trade agreements with EU, Japan, South Korea. It also has with US and UK. There's a comprehensive and progressive agreement for Trans-Pacific Partnership, which provides the Vietnamese companies easy access to market in Asia, North America, South America. Vietnam also has EU-Vietnam Free Trade Agreement. So you see, in terms of taxation, Vietnam seems better, and in terms of free trade agreements, Vietnam has been very, very enthusiastic. In terms of technological capability, India surpasses any other developing country in IT. India is a clear cut leader in IT, in pharmaceuticals, in many of the areas of biotechnology, also in automotive and textile. But Vietnam also has huge strength in electronic manufacturing and textile. Many of the textile industries, many of the foreign brands, they are moving to Vietnam. In a sense, India also has a strategic location. India can act as a gateway for South Asia and Middle East. But Vietnam is placed more strategically in terms of immediate shifting of industries. It is located closer to China than India, and it gives huge advantage for immediate manufacturing based shift. But barring from things that cannot change, things that can change, even the parliamentary panel has given the recommendation to get involved into more free trade agreements and bring the taxation regime at par with the international standards and as per the recommendation of WTO. Because these two are clearly the factors which are pulling business away from India and not allowing India to take more and immediate advantage of China plus one strategy. There is an article on page number 14. Lok Sabha approves the setting up of GST Appellate Tribunal. Lok Sabha, via a finance bill, has cleared the way for setting up of appellate tribunal for the resolution of dispute under the GST regime. Currently, if the taxpayer has to contest the claim of the finance department, they can go to the adjudicating officer, and thereafter they go to the High Court and finally to the Supreme Court. Section 109 of Chapter 17 of CGST Act empowers the central government to constitute, on the recommendation of the GST Council, an appellate tribunal that would be known as Good and Services Tax Appellate Tribunal, GST Appellate Tribunal, for hearing the appeals against the orders passed by the appellate authority or the revisional authority, that is the adjudicating officer of GST. So GST Appellate Tribunal will be a forum for second appeal in the GST laws. The first one is at the adjudicating officer against the claim made by the department, and the tax filers can go to the GST Appellate Tribunal for second appeal. It is also the first common forum of dispute resolution between the center and the states. The principal bench of the GST Appellate Tribunal will be in New Delhi, and the states can have as many benches or boards as they wish, subject to the approval of the GST Council. GST Appellate Tribunal will have 4 members, 2 technical members and 2 judicial members, and there will be equal representation from the center and the state. But all 4 members will not sit in every appeal, since this GST Appellate Tribunal will be a common forum with one principal bench in New Delhi and many regional benches. So it will ensure that there is uniformity in redressal of dispute arising under GST. Because the principal bench and the regional benches, they will all interpret the law in the same manner, thereby bringing uniformity in implementation of GST across the country. Presently, the first appeal against the department is at the adjudicating officer. There is a provision of appellate tribunal in the law that will come to be known as GST Appellate Tribunal. This is going to be the forum of second appeal. The door of High Court will never be closed. The tax filer can still go to High Court and Supreme Court. But the thing is, since there would be judicial members in the GST Appellate Tribunal, the tax filers may choose to not go to the High Court because the chances of the decision getting reversed would be less. So, of course, the settlement would be faster. Apart from other benefits, the benefit of facilitating ease of doing business. Most businesses fall under the GST radar by virtue of being a tax on goods and services. The lack of a tribunal to interpret and adjudicate the disputes makes it difficult for entrepreneurs to run their businesses as disputes have stayed unresolved for years. Why? Because they go to the High Court for appeal, and High Court takes matters of all sorts. A specialized appellate tribunal will obviously be faster. The GST Appellate Tribunal will clarify the provisions of GST law, which in turn will reduce the scope of future litigation. So the contentious issues will resolve. The interpretation of law would be made more clear because it will be one of the important tasks of the tribunal to interpret the provision of the law. Once the tribunal is established, each tax division within a state will start following the tribunal's decision. Over time, this will reduce litigation because the law will become clearer and the contentious questions of the law would be settled. The tribunal will have regional benches in every state. A state can have as many benches as he wishes, subjected to the clearance by the council. So, of course, this will ensure lower pendency and faster disposal of cases. Cases in High Court, they are costly, they are time consuming. A specialized appellate platform, GST Appellate Tribunal, is expected to become cost effective for taxpayers. See, while different state tribunals may hold divergent views on similar issues, a centralized principal bench in New Delhi is expected to resolve the differences that different state tribunals might have, so that we could have a uniform implementation of GST across the nation. There is an article in today's The Hindu. MP High Court orders lawyers to withdraw strike or face contempt action. It is settled through various judgments that lawyers do not have the right to strike. It is said that one who lives by the law must keep the law. Here, from the examination perspective, we shall have a general discussion on strike. First of all, the definition of a strike comes from Industrial Dispute Act 1947. As per IDA 1947, strike means a cessation of work by a body of persons employed in any industry acting in a combination or a concerted refusal or a refusal under a common understanding of any number of persons who are or have been so employed to continue to work or to accept employment. It is a little convoluted definition because of the jargon and the language, but strike generally and plainly means stoppage of work caused by the mass refusal of employees to perform work. A strike usually takes place in response to employees' grievance. Employees generally go on strike to put pressure on the employer to accept their demands. Thus, strike as a tool provides an opportunity for collective bargaining for the employees. Strike is a powerful tool for workmen, not only to resolve disputes with the employer, but also helps the employees to fight against oppression of the employer. Industrial Disputes Act 1947 also defines lockouts, meaning temporary closing of a place of employment. And Section 22 of Industrial Dispute Act ordinarily prohibits strikes and lockouts for those employees employed in public utility service. Remember this fact. Industrial Dispute Act says that any person employed in a public utility service shall not go on strike in breach of contract without giving the employer notice of strike. And after giving notice, the person cannot go on strike within 14 days. And also not before the expiry of the date notified in the notice. And also not during the pendency of any conciliation proceedings. So strike as such is not banned in Industrial Dispute Act 1947, but strict regulation on strike has been provisioned for. So if the employees follow the procedure as prescribed under the law, then they can go on strike. And such strikes would be considered as legal strikes. But the Industrial Relation Code 2020 has widened the restriction on employees going for strike. As per the Industrial Dispute Act 1947, only employees of public utility services were part of the law. However, Industrial Relation Code 2020 prohibits employees of all industrial establishments from going on strike. And the code also prohibits financial aid to illegal strikes or lockouts. Prohibit here does not mean absolute prohibition. It's just the conditions that we saw in the Industrial Dispute Act. The similar conditions will apply here, but we still have the concept of legal strikes. Let's look at the Supreme Court judgment on right to strike. In All India Bank Employees Association versus National Industrial Tribunal and others in 1962, Supreme Court specifically held that even very liberal interpretation of Article 19(1)(c) cannot lead to the conclusion that trade unions have a guaranteed right to an effective collective bargaining or to strike, either as part of collective bargaining or otherwise. Thus, and noted, there is a guaranteed fundamental right to form association or labor unions, but there is no fundamental right to go on strike. In Radhe Shyam Sharma versus the Postmaster General Central Circle, Nagpur 1964, Supreme Court held that as per Article 19(1)(a), there is no fundamental right to strike. So now you know, there is no fundamental right to strike. But strike is quite different from demonstration. Regarding strike by government servants, judicial view is that they are allowed to conduct demonstrations, but strike can be prohibited by the government. Since strike is not a fundamental right, it can be prohibited by the government. There was a rule made by the Bihar government prohibiting government servants from participating in any demonstrations or strike in connection with any matter pertaining to their conditions of service. Supreme Court ruled in this case in favor of demonstrations, but against a strike. Supreme Court said that a government servant, by accepting service conditions, does not lose his fundamental right under Article 19(1)(a), the right to freedom of speech and expression. Supreme Court formed an opinion that demonstration is a visible manifestation of feelings or sentiments of an individual or a group and helps in communicating one's ideas to the others. Hence, it is manifestation of right to freedom of speech and expression. So, right to demonstration falls under Article 19(1)(a), which is a fundamental right. So, the court declared the rules of Bihar government as not acceptable because the rules banned every type of demonstrations, however innocent. However, in line of the previous judgments that we have seen, Supreme Court upheld the rules of Bihar government which prohibited strike. The matter as it stands today is strike is not a fundamental right, and this right can be curbed by the government. But right to demonstration is a fundamental right under Article 19(1)(a), and so is the right to protest. Supreme Court recently in the Farm Bill related judgments have observed that farmers have constitutional right to protest. Supreme Court has used the term absolutely perfect protest. And what is that? Protest that does not affect the fundamental right of others. For example, the fundamental right to life, right to movement of others. If the right to protest is subject to public order, protest is carried out in a non-violent manner, then it is absolutely perfect protest, and that is a constitutional right. And police cannot use violent means to curb the expression of such fundamental right. There is a news article in today's newspaper concerning ICMR ethical guideline that has been released for AI usage in healthcare. We will take a case study on the topic. I would not solve the case, but just like the ICMR guideline, I will guide you in writing the answer for the case. Previously, in some of the DNS, in detail, we have discussed solving a case study. This time around, I'll just give you a little guidance, and I would expect that you write a full-fledged answer and either submit to me or put it down in the comment section for peer review. A hospital in a major metropolis is contemplating the integration of an advanced AI-powered system to aid in diagnosis of patients with a wide range of ailments. Advanced AI-powered system. The system would draw on data from patients' medical records, laboratory test results, and other relevant information to generate suggestion for treatment options. It will draw on data from patients' medical records and all kind of tests. The hospital's administration is convinced that the implementation of such a system would significantly enhance the precision of diagnosis and free up the valuable time of physicians and other healthcare professionals. However, a number of members of the hospital's ethics committee have raised valid concern regarding the potential for bias in the system's recommendation, the impact on employment opportunities, and the potential infringement on patients' privacy. So the case itself has given you the arguments on both sides. It will increase the precision, it will free up the valuable time of physicians, but there are problems as has been highlighted here. These concerns include the possibility that the system may perpetuate existing societal bias, the bias in the systems, like societal bias, racial and socioeconomic disparities in its diagnosis and treatment recommendations. Additionally, there is concern that the widespread adoption of such technology could lead to job loss for the healthcare professional and may compromise patients' privacy by collecting, storing, and potentially sharing sensitive medical information without proper consent. The hospital's leadership must weigh these ethical concerns against the potential benefit of the AI-powered system and make a decision that prioritizes the well-being and rights of patients and healthcare professionals alike. It's a simple case. Basically, it's talking about the pros and cons of AI-powered healthcare system. There are some simple questions. What steps can be taken to ensure that the AI-powered system does not perpetuate societal bias in its diagnosis and treatment recommendations? How can the hospital ensure that the patient's privacy is protected when using an AI-powered diagnostic systems? What are the ethical implications of implementing an AI-powered system that could lead to job loss for healthcare professionals? How should the hospital weigh the potential benefits of using an AI-powered system against potential ethical concerns? How can the hospital's leadership make a decision that balances the potential benefit and ethical concerns of implementing the AI-powered diagnostic system? And how can the hospital balance the need for innovation and progress in healthcare with the need to ensure ethical considerations, taking into account the implementation of new technology? So there are 6 parts here. It's extremely important, extremely important. A case study on artificial intelligence is impending. And UPSC definitely will ask in the coming years a case or a question in Section A will definitely be touched upon by UPSC in coming years. What steps can be taken to ensure that AI-powered system does not perpetuate societal bias in its diagnosis? Does not perpetuate, meaning it's already there. It's there in the healthcare system, but the AI-powered system do not perpetuate it. So it shed the healthcare system of this rather than perpetuating it. So what can be done? Ethical training of doctors, infuse morality, integrity, good work culture. First, look at the values, the virtues of people involved. If you get that right, then you will get most of the things right. People involved in the artificial intelligence modeling. Of course, you'll have engineers, artificial intelligence scientists, and the medical professionals integrated together working as a team. And all these stakeholders, they must have virtues. They should have certain kind of values. They should work with certain principles. They should imbibe certain philosophies, identify them and write them. But I'm just giving you the direction you have to move in. If you take care of that, then only you can expect of that societal bias not getting perpetuated in AI-based system. How can the hospital ensure that the patient's privacy is protected when using an AI-powered diagnostic system? So you need to have some kind of legal architecture. You need to have some kind of integrity pact. You need to have transparency, accountability. You need to have grievance redressal systems. You need to have certain policy on data storage. You need to have mechanisms like prior consent. It's right to be forgotten. What are the ethical implications of implementing an AI-powered system that could lead to job loss for healthcare professionals? Ethical implication, okay? Ethical implication of job loss. Ethical implication in context of job loss for healthcare professionals, because that's mentioned in the case. Talk about ethical implication of this particular thing, of job loss for healthcare professionals. What could be the ethical implication? Dignity, right to livelihood. There could be loss of trust in the institution. It could affect the work culture. The employees can become more insecure. Social disharmony. It could also violate the justice principle. It could lead to increase in crime, See, ethical implication will not necessarily be negative thing. It could also increase the efficiency of the institution in longer run. You should write that as well. Ethical implication would also mean people will have to be more skillful, because whenever job loss happens because of a new technology, it is only the clerical job which is lost, because a new technology is able to do the clerical job very, very well. But the job that requires high cognitive skill, that cannot be done by machine or any software. The demand for more skillful people to manage the technology always increases. And the demand for very rudimentary, simplistic clerical jobs, that decreases. The ethical implication would also be that the labor market will become more skillful. That is also an ethical implication. You should write the positives as well. How should the hospital weigh the potential benefits of using an AI-powered system against the potential ethical concerns? How should the hospital weigh, meaning how should the decision be made when you have both pros and cons? How should the hospital weigh, meaning how would you resolve the ethical dilemma? But now you have to give certain principles. How should you weigh? You can weigh it on the bar of utilitarianism. Greatest good for greatest number of people. It will be in the interest of the patients. So the duty of the healthcare system will also be performed better. Efficiency of the system, efficiency of resource. Use more moral principles. Deontological criteria you can think of. Measure of welfare you can think of. Code of conduct should write the principle for both ways, whether you will adopt it or not adopt it, or adopt with some specific conditions. For all that, you give certain principles that you will be using to weigh the potential benefit against the potential ethical concerns. So here, basically, you have to write the principles or the standards based on which you will take an informed decision, right? So you have to think about it and give me some good principles as to how you will be weighing it. How can the hospital's leadership make a decision that balances the potential benefits and ethical concerns of implementing the AI-powered diagnostic system? Now, here in this part, you have to write the principles using which you will weigh the potential benefit and ethical concern. Now, once you have used those principles to take a decision, then how should the hospital's leadership make a decision that balances both? Once you have utilized the principle to take a decision, then that decision must be implemented in a particular way. So what will be the details of the implementation of the decision? So suppose you have decided that you'll go with AI-powered system and you'll take care of things mentioned above. Then the procedure to implement it, that's what the question is asking. Training and upskilling of employees. Training. Whenever you have decided for something new to be adopted in the system, there should be training. There must be upskilling so that you don't have to fire up the people. There will be certain things, certain measures that you have to adopt, and there will be too many of them. You'll have to have the guidelines. You have to have proper data management system. You have to have an ethics committee. You have to have a grievance redressal system. You need to have principles of transparency. You need to incorporate the principles, the law of the land, like right to be forgotten. You have to be swift in that. And you have to take moral responsibility if anything goes wrong, right? You understand, different questions are asking different things. So you have to do lots of things. Think about it, brainstorm, write a proper answer. Don't stick to the word limit initially. Write as many points as you can so that your brain has various coordinates to align with, so that you can choose from them in the final exam or towards the last phase when you will be writing the mains test series towards the end after prelims. You be precise with your word limit, but now be expansive with your ideas. How can the hospital balance the need for innovation and progress in healthcare with the need to ensure ethical considerations? Quite the same as the above, but if you have to write it differently, how can the hospital balance the need for innovation and progress in healthcare with the need to ensure ethical considerations? The need for innovation and progress should not have a blanket application. Restrict AI system on certain actions. That is exactly how it should go. You should have a sandbox approach. Veracity tests the efficiency, effectiveness of that technology. So go in a phased manner so that it doesn't undermine the ethical considerations. You adopt the mean versus end principle as well.